What is Ryan Poles' plan? We talk about that next on the Unbearable Sports Podcast.
Yeah, she's got some nice long hair.
Welcome to the Unbearable Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Barron, and whether you are a Ryan Poles fan or a Ryan Poles hater for some odd reason, this is going to be the show for you because we're going to break down the 3-year plan for Ryan Poles, or what I'm guessing his 3-year plan is, because he has a certain way that he's going about this offseason, and a lot of people are talking about this year, so I thought might as well show what I think that he's planning to do for each individual year and room for optimism in the future for us Chicago Bears fans. But welcome on back. Make sure to like and subscribe. My thumbnail image for YouTube is the Bears winning the Super Bowl, so I assume a lot of Packer fans will dislike that. But it looks good on Justin Fields, I will say, for sure. But if you're listening to us on any podcast platform, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, just make sure to rate 5 stars. Greatly appreciate it. So before we get into Ryan Poles' plan, little bit of news. The Bears just started their new OTAs. This is the 6th, so Monday the 6th. They just started back up. I'll be trying to give a little bit of ins and outs on what's going on, maybe throughout the week out on Unbearable Sports. Just find me on any social media platform. But also some extra news for those that have listened to us in May. You know that we are donating all the money that I made on this show to my friend Colton, who's been battling cancer. And I'm happy to say we've raised, I'm donating over $100, which is awesome to my friends. So thank you all so much for listening. It just helps so much. This is relatively new show that I've been starting up, so I greatly appreciate everything that you guys have been doing. But also, before we get into it, I want to kind of continue to give. It feels good. It's the best thing to do. This isn't about money for me at all. So let me know down in the comments if you're watching on YouTube. Just what charity you want us to donate to next. If you have any in mind, let me know down in the comments. If you're listening to the show, rate 5 stars and throw it in the comments. Or you can just DM me at Unbearable Sports. Just what charity do you want us to donate to next? And we can kind of feature that out here. I have an idea for some t-shirts that we can donate some of the proceeds out to whatever charity we want. So let's do something good. Let's do something good for some people. So thank you all so much, and let me know. But let's get into this Ryan Poles stuff. Let's get into the strategy, or the perceived strategy, of a one Ryan Poles. So if I'm sitting back and I'm Ryan Poles, this is kind of what I expect his PowerPoint to be, his 3-year plan. If he just had like one word to describe each year, his 3-year plan for the Chicago Bears. So year one, I'm thinking rebuild. And I know rebuild is a dirty word that Ryan Poles has said, listen, we are not in a rebuild. Everything that he's doing is showing that this is a rebuild, and we'll talk about that later. Year two, he's setting us up to be able to add all sorts of players, add all sorts of talent. In year three, he's looking like, let's shape this roster. What does that mean? We'll go through it a little bit later. But really just rebuild, add, and shape. I think that's just kind of the easiest way to put what I think that the Bears are going to be trying to do, because a lot of the moves this year point to this being a rebuild. And I know that rebuild sometimes can seem like a dirty word. Not a lot of people like it because rebuild people associate with tanking. And I don't think that the Bears are tanking. If they are, my God, because I think that they're more so trying to rebuild this roster. What's the definition of rebuilding? It means that you're adding new people, new staff, new management, new players. For anyone that doesn't think this is a rebuild, what player did the Bears bring back from the old regime? There's really not a lot. And if you can name a couple right off the cuff, good for you. Because the only one that I can name off the cuff is DHC. There's really not a lot of people that they wanted to bring back because Ryan Poles wanted to add his guys, his staff, his management, his players to this team. Now, this is definitely different than when Matt Nagy was then our head coach, because think about it. Ryan Pace was still our GM, And he's looking at this roster going, I like these players. It's just the coach that isn't doing it. So that's why you scrap them. And now they added in Matt Nagy. So for Poles, he's looking at this team going, I didn't pick these people. I don't like these people. And that's what you heard with him and Eberflus. They were evaluating the talent and figuring out where they needed to add bodies. And that's exactly what he did. And another big key thing that showed, hey, the Chicago Bears are in a rebuild, not a win now type of moment, is if they were win now, they would do what probably Ryan Pace would have done and moved Khalil Mack's contract back and a lot of other people's money back. That's what the Saints did. That's what Ryan Pace did. And Ryan Poles said, nah, we're not going to be paying this $30 million cap hit to Khalil Mack. So what did they do? They ended up trading him. And that trade, to me, just really showed that, hey, I need to overhaul this roster, and this is going to be rebuilt with people that I like. Because if you really think about it, the Khalil Mack trade didn't necessarily benefit the Bears this year. The Bears didn't win this year. Where I think that the Bears ended up winning the trade was for the following year, freeing up that $30 million in cap space or in the 20s, depending on the way that you look at it. We freed up so much cap space and just got rid of that big, huge contract that Ryan Pace kept pushing down into the future. And that's why it got so big. It just kept snowballing and snowballing and snowballing until Pohl said, nope, not on my watch. We're not going to be having this. So it frees up cap space for the next year. And this year, when you think about this year, it only freed up $6 million. That really allowed you to get Al-Qadim Muhammad. Is Al-Qadim Muhammad Khalil Mack? Nah, not at all. I actually personally hope that Trevis Gipson is starting rather than him because I like Trevis Gipson and I think he could be really good in this defense. But then we ended up getting a second round draft pick. Now, Jaquan Brisker, typically rookies don't all of a sudden ball out, especially at that safety position. I think he's going to be good. I really liked him coming out, love the selection, but you can't really expect him to be like an all pro or anything absolutely amazing, but he's going to be a good starter, I think, this year. So that's where I think this year the Bears, quote unquote, lost the trade. But then next year, that's really where you see a lot of the benefits of having that cap space rather than having to pay for the penalty of trading a Khalil Mack. So I love the move from a long term rebuild type of perspective. But then also, you saw Ryan Poles acquire 11 picks. Now, that might just be his draft strategy. But what we're seeing right now is by trading back and trading back and trading back, he's also adding players that are Ryan Poles' players. It adds depth. Not all those people are going to be starters. You'll be happy if like one or two of them become starters, those later round guys. But still, you're adding depth. Rather than having Lachavious Pig Simmons, now you can have Zachary Thomas or or Braxton Jones. You have your people that are now your backups and kind of the foundation of your roster. So that's really why I see this as more of a rebuild. You can even add in a lot of the 1 year deals that he was adding and just trying to fill out this roster. But it really feels like he's rebuilding it. So, what do we even expect this year? So, since it's a rebuild, are we just kind of writing it off and just assuming that this year's going to be bad? Don't watch the Bears? Well, no, watch, but look for progressions. I don't know many people that think that the Bears are a playoff team this year. And quite frankly, if you listen to the national media, they're talking about the Bears being one of the worst teams, if not the worst team this year. Do I agree with that? No. But could it happen? Yes, it pretty much anything can happen, to be honest with you. But the Bears were just hoping for a lot of progression with Justin Fields, taking a step up with these second year tackles, having Darnell Mooney really kind of become a number one wide receiver. We're hoping for that this new scheme, it should make this a lot better from an offense and a defensive perspective. But only time will tell, and that's where it's more of a rebuild to see what can we take out of this first year and make it really amazing the second year, because second year is really making the jump. We are adding the players, making the jump, or you can even call it making the leap is probably what it's better called, because next year is where I get excited. Obviously, I can't wait to watch football, but I think that the Bears are going to be outstanding next year because we're number one in cap space. 95 million to about 100 million in cap space. So Ryan Poles is able to add his players. He has a full year of his scouting staff to be able to look at different draft prospects and also scout people out across the league. So he didn't want to kind of lock people up to these long-term deals. And because of that, now he has a full year to kind of assess talent and say, this is who I want on my team. Let's start to add all these players because we have the cap space. And they're also first place by a large margin. It's over $20 million because I think second place is about $71 million in cap space. So an absolute crazy amount of money compared to the next closest team. And you just got to love it. But this is where the whole trade of Khalil Mack really gives you the value. Now, let's just say you could add two good pass rushers for the price of Khalil Mack. That's just the way that why you might not want a player like a Khalil Mack on your team when you keep pushing his salary back and back and back and back to where it gets up to like a 30 million type of cap hit like he would have had this year. But also I want to point out too that the key free agents that the Bears have are really just Roquan Smith and David Montgomery. You could add in a Byron Pringle or a Nicholas Morrow, depending on how they perform and how big of a piece they are with this team. But really, for us Bears fans that have seen these guys play, Roquan Smith, I expect the Bears to re-sign. There's been a lot of murmurs and over the summer that he's going to get a new deal. But now with all the allegations, that might put things a little bit on hold. But David Montgomery will be interesting because he is a running back. We'll have to see what Ryan Poles thinks about these running backs because maybe he'll pay them, maybe he won't. It just gets into that whole do you pay running backs? How much does the running game or running backs truly matter to this system? Since if you remember the 49ers, you throw anyone back there, they're going to be fantasy relevant for your specific team. But like I said, even if they sign Roquan Smith, you're still probably going to be number one in cap space, which is absolutely incredible. So you'll love to see it, and we can just add all sorts of players. But the big question is, what do we do this year? Like, what is our record this year going into year two? And what I mean by that is, let's say we win 7 games and the team is fighting, the team is looking good. So, the over under is in fact that 7 games. If we hit that mark, I think that people are starting to look at the Bears going, hey, you know what? I could go over there, make some good money, and they're building something and they could add a whole lot of other people. And now this team is cooking with gas. I think it becomes a good free agent type of destination because of the cap space, because of the potential with having a Justin Fields, because of the new coaching staff. Or you could hopefully, if this ends up happening, if you end up losing a lot of games and the talking heads are right and they're saying, I told you so on ESPN and NFL Network, that the Bears would have a top 5 pick. If the Bears have a top 5 or even a top 10 draft selection, I just wanted to bring this up. It's a great quarterback draft next year. That's what it's projected as. That's what people are talking as. Things can change. I'm not saying the Bears should draft a quarterback for Justin Fields. I'm a huge Justin Fields fan. And if they moved on from him, I think it's a huge wrongdoing because I fully support just how talented Justin Fields is. And I think that he needs a good shot in the NFL. But the reason why I bring that up is remember last year when we got Justin Fields and it was a good quarterback draft and people started trading up like San Francisco for Trey Lance and like the Chicago Bears did for one Justin Fields? If we have one of the top picks, we could definitely trade that back, which Ryan Poles has shown that he's totally down to do, and we could get more draft picks. I'm just throwing that out there, just in case if we're watching the Bears in October, November, December, and they're not doing well, we can go, hey, at least we can trade down. You're always rooting for wins, but if we are losing, there's at least this where it could make this team a little bit better. Yet again, I'm not hoping for losses. I'm just saying if it happens, there's at least a sunny side, an optimistic side to this, and it's technically realistic as well because people will probably want those new quarterbacks. But like I said, this year two, it's going to be crazy. This team is going to be overhauled. This team is really going to look new. And I think it's going to be a playoff team and probably a competitive team, depending on how good they were the year before. So we talked about the first 2 years, rebuild and add. So what the heck does shape mean? Because what does it mean? What does it mean to shape a roster? Now, the last slide that I got here is shaping the roster, which means there's a lot of decisions for the Bears. What I think about shaping is you've added all these people. And now what you're doing is saying, who do I think is going to stay on this team? Who do I think is going to be a key contributor for the years ahead? So one of the biggest options in year 3 is they have to decide 5th year of Justin Fields. So is this your quarterback of the future? We saw this with the Baker Mayfield. The Browns add that 5th year option for Baker Mayfield, but now those 5th years are really fully guaranteed and locking you into that quarterback for another year. And it's not that cheap as well. It's not like a $5 million cap hit. It's definitely 10 plus type of a cap hit that you'd be paying that quarterback. So it's really a big time decision for Poles to say, is this the guy? Is this my guy that I'm going to tie my career to? But then also too, an interesting nugget, Ryan Poles did not really give out any 3-year deals when you're looking at it. Ogunjobi was one, but everyone else is pretty much 2-year deals. So when you're looking at this year 3, you're looking at Justin Jones, you're looking at Lucas Patrick, different players like that only got 2-year deals, and you're saying, should we re-sign them? Should we add them back to this team? And you really kind of see, what is this team going to become, especially because your former Bears players or potentially former Bears players, Darnell Mooney, Cole Kmet, Trevis Gipson, Jaylon Johnson, those are all very good players that have contributed to your team. You're talking about your number 1 wide receiver, number 1 cornerback, number 1 tight end, and Trevis Gipson, who has been a starting level edge. So you're saying, who out of this group is a Ryan Pace guy, and who out of this group is a Ryan Poles guy that he wants to build around? And that's where I think you start to see the shape of this roster. Who are the people that were on this team before Poles that we want to keep on this team? And who are the people that Poles signed to a 2-year deal that he's saying, you know what, Patrick? Lucas Patrick, you are our leader on this offensive line, and we still want you. So that's where I think year 3 is really going to be pivotal for them to say, this is going to be the direction of the team. This is the direction of the Chicago Bears, because you have a lot of expiring deals. And like I said, a decision to be made on Justin Fields. So that's about it. That's kind of my assumption on the Ryan Poles, the strategy. So really for me, this year, just like as a whole, this year, look for the bright spots. Look at the offense. Look at Justin Fields, and is he progressing? Because that's all we can hope for. That is the biggest thing that we need to hope for this year. Because really, anybody that projects the Bears to have a lot of wins or a lot of losses, the number one thing they talk about is Justin Fields. His progression is pivotal this first year. But then next year, guys, if our heads are hanging low because we lost, or our heads are hanging high because we just won a lot of games and a lot of people counted us out and we have this underdog mentality, man, next year we're going to be adding a whole bunch of players, and it's definitely good to be optimistic. That's why we've been making some of these moves. It's not all about just this year. It's about the future. And I think that Ryan Poles is trying to really kind of build that future with his types of players, even though I'm not in love with this roster this first year. But let me know what you think. Comment down below if you're watching on YouTube. Make sure to follow us on social media at Unbearable Sport on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok as well. But thank you all so much, and Unbearable Sports Podcast, we're out.
Yeah, she's got some nice long hair, and you know that she's a bad chick.
Thank you for listening to this Belly Up Sports Podcast Network product. Some said we go belly up, so we made it our name, and we're still here.